What if we had something else in our state? We'll add a second thing to state. Oops. Somehow I got rid of my quote and my comma. And I'll call it acrobats. And acrobats is an array. Who's an acrobat? Megan, you an acrobat? Yeah. Who else? Who else looks acrobatic? Jake? Either, both? Sure. All right. Jack, whatever. Jack, Jake. All right, we got lots of acrobats. So, one thing that's worth noting is this doesn't then blow acrobats away. When you call set state and you pass in an object, you're not passing an object that should completely replace state necessarily. Any properties you pass in that object will get changed in state. Any properties you don't will just stay as they are. So you're not passing in a new state object exactly. You're passing in an object with just the changes. So that's not going to blow away our array. So now we have an array, and I want to print those on the page. Let's see. Hello, Chris. Here's tonight's roster. And I want to put a UL on the page. Inside that UL, I want an LI for every one of those acrobats. So how can I do that? Well, just like this, I can put a JavaScript expression inside curly braces, and it seems to evaluate that and put it on the page. So you can actually put an array of JSX elements, and that works. So what if we had a function available to us that builds a new array based on some other array and actually returns that new array? It goes through every element in one array, and then it builds a new array of the return values. That would be super cool. What's that? Oh my gosh, it is map. Huh, we do have something like that. And it has nothing to do with React, right? That's just a JavaScript thing. So, okay, let's put some curly braces here. And what's our array? This.state.acrobats, right? So let's call this.state.acrobats.map. So map takes a callback, right? And the first argument to that callback is each item of the array, right? So a single acrobat. And then what I want that thing to return is an LI containing that acrobat. That's it. It did it. So I think I'm using a new trick here that I haven't shown you. If you use an arrow function with only one argument, you don't need parentheses, right? Similarly, if it's a one-liner, that will automatically be the return value. I don't actually have to say return LI. If you only have a single statement in your arrow function, you don't need the curly braces around it, and you don't need the word return. It will automatically return what is there. So you can do stuff like this very succinctly. So this is really that. But we don't have to be that explicit. And that's not a React thing. That's just how arrow functions work. If you have one line that you want to be the return value, you don't need the curly braces, and you don't need the word return. So again, we're mapping over everything in that array, this.state.acrobats, and for each one of those, our callback is receiving one acrobat as the argument acrobat, and then I am just returning a JSX element that contains that acrobat inside curly braces in its body. And that works. Because we used map, that will get returned, and this JavaScript expression will get replaced by a bunch of JSX elements. So I call them acrobats this time, but this is already getting really close to just being the whole spells thing again. Let's make sure we can add one. So what would we need to do? Let's have another button. Add another. Let's make it call update acrobats. Or add acrobat. How's that? Add acrobat. So we will make this button have an on-click that again calls an arrow function. And the arrow function will call this dot add acrobat. That way we know this is bound to the right thing. There's another way to do this that we haven't talked about yet. And long term, that's what we'll be doing. But let's try to only learn 10 things at once. Add acrobat. So what's it going to do? Just add something to that thing that's in state, right? But we can't just say this.state.acrobats.push, because that would be modifying it directly, right? What we want to do is start with a copy of what's already there. So we need to make a copy of this.state.acrobats as it is now and save it in a local variable. So I could say const acrobats, and then I don't just want to say this.state.acrobats because that actually doesn't make a copy. Now we took advantage of this when we were doing spells. I didn't point it out at the time, but we were totally taking advantage of this because we would modify. Well, we never did any editing, but except when we did faves. So when you click the fave button in spells, we just took that object and changed its fave value, right? But that actually changed the array. We didn't have to replace it in the array with the one we had changed because we weren't ever making copies of anything. Objects, this is not true of strings and numbers and other primitive types, but in JavaScript, objects, which includes arrays, are always passed by reference, not by value. Anybody know what that means? You learned languages in college that do that thing? Yeah.
You're getting like value reference is like you're getting the actual object itself, so like a reference to its memory location.
Right.
You can like modify that object if it's not immutable.
Right. You're basically getting a reference to its memory location. You're changing the exact same object. So if I do this and I say acrobats.push Leon, I'm actually changing the one in state directly, which we don't want to do. So to make a copy of it, it used to be a big pain in the neck. It's a lot easier than it used to be. So what you can do now, we can make a new array with square brackets. And then what would this be so far? This would be an array that has as its first element that entire array, right? But what you can do is break an array into its pieces by using a new operator from ES6 called the spread operator, which is an ellipsis, aka 3 dots. So what 3 dots, this.state.acrobats does, is break acrobats into the individual items. And if I put those individual items inside a new array, what I've effectively done is copy the array. So if why that works is just a little too complicated, just know this is a super easy way to make a copy of an array. Put some new square brackets, put the other array inside there, and put the spread operator in front of it. Yeah?
So the old way, like what isn't actually a copy, so then if you would have like changed the copy you just made, would that have changed the original?
It would have changed the original. Right. Exactly. Yeah. It works for objects as well. And it's not really necessary for anything else. But it works for objects and arrays. So for an object, if acrobats were an object instead of an array, we could put that inside curly braces and it would work. And it's worth pointing out, you could still add new things to this. So you can copy an array into a larger array if you want to. But we just want to start with a copy of that array. Then we want to push Leon onto it, and then we want to update state. So we can call this.setState, and we pass in an object, and we only give it the keys that we actually want to change. So we don't need to put name in there. We can just put acrobats, and we want it to be what we have in our local variable acrobats. So here's another handy-dandy little syntactic shortcut from ES6. If you're building an object, you have an object literal, and you have a key that you want to set to a variable that is named the same thing as the key. So our key is acrobats, and our value is a variable called acrobats. You can shorten this to that. Used all the time. And then you could still continue to, you can do that in the middle of a larger object literal or whatever. That's fine. But this is just shorthand for this. But if your value is in a variable that's named the same thing as a key, you don't have to put the colon in the variable name. It does the same thing. So let's see if this actually changes. Update heading. Still works. Add another, we hope, adds Leon to the list of acrobats, and it does. And by changing that array, it automatically changes the page. We don't have to worry about updating the UI. We just manage our data, and the UI changes automatically. So that's the power of React. Questions? Mm-hmm. So the way the magic works, anytime we change state, it redraws the page. It's always going to, anytime its data changes, it's going to rerun the render method and see if anything changed. What's that? So set state, if set state is being called, it knows the state has changed. Yes. It doesn't just watch for that value to change. So if you just say this.state.something equals something else, that's not going to trigger a re-render. So you'll have changed state, but the UI won't have updated, which is the entire point of changing state. Yep. Got it?